Welcome back to the Social Work Race podcast. Good to see you all. Although I can't see you, I know you're there. Do you know what I mean? So I just wanted to go through. Actually, let me say this. It's always challenging because I have to really work myself up to do these podcasts, to record them. Anything I do on social media, it takes a lot of work in my mind to do it. And so when I get going, I like knock out 2, 3 at once. And here we are today. We're talking about in fact, before I go into it, I like to make sure that the podcasts that I do um, are all related to how we work as practitioners, how we practice. So I want you to be able to leave this session with the ability to, in fact, every session, I want you to have the ability in every session to implement what you've learned. If I learn something, I'm going to share it with you. It may or not be relevant to you, but share it with someone who it is relevant to. That's how I like to work. It's practical knowledge because at the end of the day, social work is practical. And practical also means thinking as well. However, this was an interesting topic for me because it depends where you work. A couple of London boroughs I've worked in, they've tend to have been in the poorer areas, which means you'll meet a certain demographic of people, and that could be heritage or it could be heritage or it could be sex and class. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. And now I work out of London. It's a completely different world. In so many ways, it's a completely different world. And so in the local authority that I work in, you can meet a mixture of people who are in great poverty or people who are in great wealth. And obviously there's a stark difference between them in their lifestyles. Now, saying that, what does that mean to me? I turn up at the door, I'm a black man, what do they see? Honestly, since being a social worker in this local authority, haven't had a problem. But I do believe that they see something different. And I've had a couple of people make comments to me thinking that I'm going to work with their children better. And I'm wondering why they say that. I don't mind, but it's like I'm seen as something different. Well, what do they see? What do people see? And that's really the question. So my topic today is looking at how, in fact, let me get it right because, I get these things wrong. Let's go for it like this. Richer parents are more likely to use connections to avoid social worker interventions, finds child neglect report. Do you get that? So this topic is really about how people in the higher classes, how they are assessed differently or how they're seen differently. And this is a fact. And let's not think for 1 minute, oh, I'm immune to all of this nonsense. No, you're not. It's impacting in some way. And the outcomes that we have seen statistically have shown us that this is an issue. What I'm going to do, let me just enlarge this. And for those of you who are listening, I'm going to read the report or the article rather. This was written in, do we have a date? 2018. Yeah, it's recent enough. It says here, richer parents are more likely to use their powerful social connections to avoid interventions by social services. A report into child neglect into affluent families has found, and the study was commissioned by the City of London, discovered that socially privileged parents often had a sense of entitlement, which brought a greater confidence to challenge the child protection decision-making processes. This meant that they were more likely to resist involvement from authorities, it found. Well, I found that also with the families I work with. Some of them in the lower classes will resist as well. And anyone can resist. However, pound for pound, affluent families do try to avoid that for a number of reasons. But what I want to look at this point, before I read further, is what we see when we walk through the door of affluent families and what we hear. You know what we see? We see a very nice house, nice car, garage. We tend to see white folk. And the way that they stand, what do we see? We see the way they stand, the way they present, their accent, their pronunciation, their vocabulary can throw us off. That is very real. It can be a form of disguised compliance. And then when, sometimes they'll be pleasant at first, but if they think that you're going to escalate a matter because of the level of neglect that we are seeing, they can change their tune, and they are in many ways naturally entitled to do so. Okay. Um, so what they did was when they did this, here we go. Workers in fields, including social services and safeguarding, were selected from 12 local authorities to take part in the study and were anonymously interviewed by their experiences. One social worker told the authors they know where to go with their complaints. They know people within the council because the place is so small as well. They get on to their local councillor, someone who they go hunting or shooting or playing golf with. That's the reality of working in a very small place like this. They know people in high places and they threaten you with people as well. So you've got to be confident when you arrive and know what you're talking about. And that is it right there. So whilst we are stimulated, because this is information, when we step into their homes, before we go through with anybody in their homes, if we step in through that door or even make a phone call, you've got to know what you're talking about. Now, you only know so much because, well, for me, for example, I work in the assessment team. So I'm one of the first points of contact, physical contact at least. But if you're taking over a case, maybe in a child protection team from me, you know a bit more and you're a bit more prepared. But as for me, I have a referral and I'm thinking, okay, what do we do with this? We can see levels of neglect. It wouldn't come through to us if there wasn't a concern. Do you know what I mean? It may be substantiated, it may not be. But when we are making that contact, we have to know what is the concern on paper. Now, when we get through that door, we may see it worse or it might not be as bad as what it was initially said. But we are stimulated immediately because we're in a new environment. And so the information needs to be in our heads before we step through. That's called preparation. Yeah. PCF1, professionalism, right? Or PCF9, is it? So we really have to know what we're doing there in the first place because they are probably prepared for you. Do you understand? Their child is suffering a level of neglect from these parents, and they don't want to be embarrassed by the process of being put on child protection plans, where it might even affect their jobs. And so they'll fight because that's their child and that's their reputation. So when you step through the door, you're looking around, you're smelling, you're seeing, you're hearing. It can be for some of us an overload. And only experience will allow us to process that effectively. So it says here in the last line of that paragraph, so you've got to be confident, yes, know why you're there and stand on that when you arrive and know what you're talking about. Well, we had a referral that said X. Okay. So don't be overloaded. And if you are overloaded, take your time. Another interviewee said, you will get affluent families who will come and stand in reception, and even though the social worker has gone down, where they will demand to see the team manager or they will ring the director. And it's not just an empty threat. They will ring the director. Fine. Now, if the director or the managers are worth £1 million, or if they're worth 10 pence, the one thing that they need to do is direct these people back to the social worker. If they're not doing that, I would say there's a level of a conflict of interest. Okay. It's interesting because it says here in the article, whereas with our less affluent families, they may stand in reception and shout and get kicked out. And they make threats to go to the newspaper, but actually it's not going to happen. But affluent families will fight with everything in their arsenal, and it can intimidate. So my advice to you is stand your ground. Why? Because they could well be hiding something from you. That's crucial. This is why, hear me out. This is why I did a session on the Madeleine McCann case. Because for me, for them to give their child high doses of a sleeping concoction, even though they're qualified to do it, and then their child goes missing and they're outside partying, they cannot see the room. They cannot tell what's going on. If that was the case, their daughter wouldn't have been abducted. The fact that that happened, normally that would be a child protection situation for the other children that were there. My thing is this: what if the family's hiding something from you? What if they are sexually abusing their child and their child is acting up and they're trying to scare you off? You don't know what's there. And that is our job to kind of dig. And they may resist. And, less affluent families do it too. They resist. But you've got to do all you can. Because the last thing you want is for a child at some point to say, and the social worker just wouldn't listen to me, or the social worker was just hoodwinked. And now I've grown up with a life of abuse because they were looking around, seeing the riches and being scared off. Stick to the point. So when you receive a referral or when you're working with a family, you've got to analyze the information and say, well, what we're looking at here is physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. They're not going to education. What has been said by the child or parent? What are the concerns? Know them in your head so that when you get there, you can establish whether it's true or not. And if the parents are not playing ball, these are the parents that you need to investigate all the more. Get your teeth into it and don't let go. That's your job. And we will be hated all the more for it. Absolutely. But there are laws in place and processes in place to stop parents from I'm missing a word here, avoiding investigation. And so you kind of have to fall back on the systems that are already in place. And if you ask me, if it is not justified by the heads that, and they're taking the case from you for a completely unjustified reason, I would leave that in the case notes. Yeah. And make it known to line managers, there's something going on here. It's not right. A good and reasonable manager will always send that back to, well, it's the social worker that's going to work your case. Okay. If families are resisting you, speak to someone and get guidance. Sometimes it's about trying again, trying a different approach, listening to what their concerns are, and I've often found that I can do that work. It's not with everybody, but I can do that work. You could easily be thrown off at the beginning, but try again. And I'll come back another day. Phone up instead. Send a letter. Do you know what I mean? Try that. But if that resistance is there, you have to escalate the matter. What's going on here? Do you know what I mean? But what we're finding is that I've got a post up on TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn, and it says that affluent families have neglect that's difficult to detect. So what we're finding is that the more money you have, is the easier it is to get away with abuse of your children. And that's where we come in. And yes, let's get ready to make enemies, because if there is a lot of resistance from people who have a lot of money, and try to use that influence to avoid us seeing what they're doing to their children or not doing for their children, we have to put a stop to that now. In this age, we really do have to put a stop to that. So I go back to the Madeleine McCann case because it looks like they had friends to allow them to not be referred to children's services to explore. If you are going out and drinking and dosing your children and leaving them a good distance away, Um, who did they know to not have them referred to social services when they returned home? They're British citizens. They've committed an offence. I've worked with families who have left their children and gone down the road. They cannot see them. They're looked after by elders that are not old enough, but older children. Social services. So it's, when you look into the family, sometimes you can see actually this is a pattern of behavior. Happens a lot, and they don't see anything wrong with it. What else are they doing then? What else are they neglecting? That's the digging that we do. Now, we as social workers, we don't have the power to just barge into someone's house. We don't have the power to demand, but we can request. The only people that have the power are the courts and the police. In that situation, all we do is inform and communicate with the families. And that's in any case. So let's do what we can do and understand what the other parts of the system are there for. The police are there to carry out the requirements of the courts, or if they have their own concerns, they can take a child. We can't do that. So know your place and know why you're there and know what your limits are. Don't make empty threats. Think before you speak. Listen carefully to the language of the people that you're working with and for, and see if there's, and explore if there's anything that you think that they're trying to hide, and you have the right to suspect. But don't let the money, the accent, the language, and the threats cause you to lose your scent on what might be a real and life-changing concern. Don't let that happen. Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here we go. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, this was helpful. And let's see if you visit my TikTok. There are some interesting posts on there. But I also want to say, um, I really want to help social work students be more ready for practice. Yeah, that's been going well. We've been speaking to some of the live sessions. We're having student week this week. No, next week, actually. Next week starts on the 13th and the 15th. We'll be having student week where students get to come and ask their questions so that they can learn. It's an accelerated learning course, live on Instagram, the social work race. Hey guys, take care of yourselves.